Mm-hmm.
If you had to sum up your experience in Army in one word, what would it be?
I think family is weirdly the word that I would use to describe like my time in ROTC and my experience even with like the bigger army. I didn't expect the army to be a supportive environment. I expected it to be cutthroat, competitive, like barely any girls, and the girls would all just be trying to like be men almost. Like we would have to put each other down in order to strive because we're all competing against guys. Like when it comes down to some of the opportunities, like we're not looked at, oh, she's fast for a girl. It's just like she's either fast or she's slow. And sometimes because of how the army factors in, it is a lot of physical things. And so I didn't think there could be an emotional component. And what I've been like happy to learn and what I like hold very close to me is this idea of family and mentorship in this huge organization where if you don't consider it your family, then what are you doing it for? Because we spend so much time together and we spend so much time kind of doing nothing with each other and waiting for the next thing to happen and waiting to be told what to do, that there has to be some kind of camaraderie between us and some kind of like, well, at least I like you, like at least we're doing nothing together. And so when some of us are struggling, like we are really good at asking each other questions and asking each other for help, and there's no better feeling than actually being able to answer someone's question. And I think part of being an MS2, which means like military science year 2, is being able to have mentors myself, but also mentor the freshmen. I have 2 mentees that I love very much, and they're both girls, which makes me happy because I think it's kind of scary to be a girl in the military. So I guess family is for my time in the army, but I'm not sure if that's for everyone, and I hope it is, but yeah.
Okay. Let's see. When I ask a question, restate it. That one was fine because, like, obviously we know what the question is, but some of these I forgot to tell you that before.
Gotcha.
Okay. So yeah, why did you join Army? And if you can think of a specific moment or memory and elaborate.
Why did I join Army ROTC? I think this has a lot to do with my personal situation and my background, and for everyone, they feel like they need it. Like I think very few people, unless you feel so inclined to make something that's violent but also selfless in a way, and unless you're so motivated to do that, I think that you come to the Army because you need something out of it. And for me, I was an out-of-state student. Tuition at UNC as an out-of-state student is extremely high, and I was sacrificing going in-state to Penn State, which is where I'm from. And my dad told me, you can go to UNC for 1 year, but if you come home without a scholarship, that's where you're going to stay. And so going to Army ROTC and trying to use my skills, because I know I have some skills, that was my way of trying to maintain being a student here. And Army, instead of like the other branches, was more of a personal decision because my aunt went to West Point, and she served almost a full career, and she's retiring this February as a full bird colonel. And so she's definitely one of my role models, but I never expected to be just like her. I never expected to go to West Point. I never expected to give up my own personal freedom in order to protect other people's. While I admired her for it, I didn't think it was for me. And then I came to UNC and I saw all these organizations and I thought, how am I going to stay here? And if joining ROTC was a way to do that and I enjoyed it, then I was willing to give up my freedom in order to gain more opportunities. I was willing to give up some of my time in order just to have time here. And if I didn't like it, I was like, oh, I can quit, which is actually harder than you think it is. I think not very many people do quit because it's so, I don't know, I want to say captivating is the word, but once you're once you're invested, I think it's hard to come away because UNC ROTC pays for my tuition, they pay me a book stipend, and it's also where I get a lot of my community. So I guess I joined Army ROTC because of the opportunities, the money, the family, and also the career that I thought I could have. Because working, as soon as you're a veteran and you try to become another government employee, you actually have veterans preference. Like if I want to work for the State Department and there's me and an identical candidate, but I'm a veteran, they have to choose me legally. And I've always been really interested in public service in some capacity. Maybe that's also the reason I felt like I could do Army ROTC. And I think that was a big pull for me. It's what's good for me now, what's good for me in the future, and do I enjoy it? And all those things were a yes. And I felt like I had people who were telling me, yes, this is the right decision for you. And so that was really nice. And that's why I chose Army.
What are some Army-specific classes or activities you have to do in order to stay in ROTC?
I have to do a lot of Army-specific activities in order to stay in Army ROTC. I think we're lucky because we actually get to schedule earlier than other students. Once we're contracted, we get to schedule kind of at the same time as the athletes because there's an Army-specific lab. It's 2 hours on Wednesdays where we go and practice battle drills and other simulations outside in uniforms with fake weapons. It's mostly about tactics, but it's things that you can only really learn in a physical setting. So I'm glad we do it. But the other things I have to do, I'm not as sure about, but I don't mind taking them. You take Army 101 and Army 102 your freshman year, and then Army 202 and 201 and 202, and so on and so forth. And so every year of Army, you're taking a class a semester. You're taking the lab every semester, and you also have PT, which stands for physical training, in the mornings before class starts because it's mandatory and they need to make sure it works for everyone. These workouts start at 6 a.m. and they end at 7:05. If you don't have an 8 a.m., you stay a little bit late and you do final formation and people talk to you. But all of these mandatory physical trainings help you and they help you get faster, but they're not always the workouts that I would choose for myself. And so I also need to work out on my own in order to keep up the physical readiness that the Army ROTC program requires to succeed, I think. So I think all in all, a 2-hour lab, a class twice a week for an hour, so that's 4 hours, PT 3 times a week, so that's 8 mandatory hours a week, but they definitely, was that 3? But they definitely stretch out further than that and can kind of invade into your private life.
So yeah, elaborating on that, how does being in Army affect like how you spend your free time? What can you, like time management with schoolwork and socializing, like other decisions you have to make and rules you have to follow and stuff like that. Like stuff that's more like mundane and small but has an impact on you.
I was a gymnast in high school since I was 5 actually. I was a gymnast and I practiced around 20 hours a week. And so that schedule and that like framework of practice from 3 to 6:30 or 5 to 9, whatever it was, like framed my whole week. And even though it was high school, so I'm not sure I had so much homework, I knew when I was doing my work. And being busy to me helps me be more productive, even if it's a stressor. So I feel like I have times when ROTC is overwhelming and I am forced to do my homework when I would rather relax. And I'm forced to even do the small things. Like I call my mom less when ROTC is all encompassing. But if I have like just an exam, I might call my mom to complain. Something I think that's weird about ROTC is that we don't tend to complain about it to normal people because it's hard to explain. And there's almost no use in complaining because it's not going to change. ROTC is not graded on a curve. There aren't certain assignments you have to complete. You're never really sure where you are. You just have to kind of be prepared for anything because sometimes a senior can make a demand of you, a junior can make a demand of you, or someone in charge. So cadre is what they're called. Like the professors in the military science can make a demand for you, and you just have to try and be as ready as you can. That sounds really hard and dramatic and like it would interfere with your social life, but in a way it also adds, because we spend a lot of time in the armory trying to study, trying to help each other, trying to just get along, trying to figure out where we should go for lunch and use our military discount. And so I think in a lot of ways, the time, like the social time we spend with each other at our houses or on weekends is even better because we know that it's such a break. It feels like such a break. And so I think my weeks are very scheduled and they're very busy most of the time, but I have to block out free time. And then every now and then, after all of that work, I have to have time when it's just to do nothing. And so I'd say it's a big contrast for me. I don't sprinkle in self-care. I have to have it all in one big time. Oh, I didn't talk about field training. Should I talk about field training?
Is that like Fort Bragg?
Yeah.
Talk about that when you explain, like you can do talk about FTX and then go into like Air Assault School, what that is, or like other different things that like people get selected for, and just kind of like give a brief explanation of what those are. You can do that next.
Cool. So like how I got selected for Air Assault School?
Just explain what they are. So like explain what FTX is, explain what Air Assault School is, and like if there's any other ones you know about, explain those two, and then I'll ask you more about like how you were selected and when and stuff like that.
Sounds good. Okay. So the Army has a lot of acronyms, and I think that's something that makes a lot of people confused and also sounds scarier than it actually is. So like I said, PT stands for physical training, and that's just our workouts in the morning. But FTX is the next scary acronym, and it stands for field training exercise. And when we do an FTX, it means that we go away to some kind of military area, whether that be a Fort Bragg, whether that be a National Guard training center. We go and we conduct tactics. We learn. Sometimes we would do range work, if that makes sense. And field training is for the entire battalion. So you're given people battalion. Field training is for the entire battalion, and the Tar Heel Battalion, which is where I belong, is everyone who is in Army ROTC. A battalion is comprised of 2 platoons, and the platoons are run by juniors, so MS3s. Within a platoon, there's 3 squads, and those squads are also led by MS3s. And finally, where I fit in personally, happy me, is that I get to be a team leader of one half of a squad. So if I'm Alpha team leader, there's an Alpha and Bravo. If I'm Alpha team leader, I might have 3 or 4 people who I'm in charge of, being accountable for, making sure they're somewhere on time, and just checking attendance. Also asking if they have the right gear and if they have any questions about what's going on in our training. And then the Army also has more training opportunities that are very competitive, or range from pretty competitive to very competitive. You can go away, everyone goes away to a field training summer between their junior and their senior year, which is called advanced camp. Every cadet in the country who's in Army ROTC has to go away and pass this summer training, which ranges around 30 to 40 days, depending on the year. There's map reading, there's range tests, there's navigation, tactics, drill and ceremony, so marching people around. There's actual knowledge-based standardized tests. It's a whole range of things, but everyone must pass that. Besides that, there are other skill-specific schools that you can attend. Airborne School is one of them, where you jump out of planes, and it's like more paratroop training. You jump and you have a parachute and you release it and you learn how to land correctly and then run to the objective. So it's also a lot of running. Personally, I did air assault school, so I can speak a lot to that school. It's based on helicopter operations and air assault operations, which means when you assault vertically from a helicopter, first you learn how to hook up a helicopter to things that might carry, which is called sling loading. So believe it or not, military helicopters can lift things like Humvees and enormous amounts of water and supplies. So we learn how to properly hook up and tie and secure all of those different materials. We also learn how to jump out of a helicopter with a rope, which is called rappelling. I imagine it, like I always explain it, it's like rock climbing when you're going down with a rope, but there's no wall, there's just air. So that's the main fun part of air assault school. And another important part of those schools are the physical components, whether it be running, whether it be lifting, whether it be the conditioning they put you through, which is called, when they smoke you, it means they make you do a lot of different exercises until you're smoked, until you're really exhausted. And then the final Army skill that is in a range of schools and I think is important for anyone to understand if they understand the Army is called rucking. Rucking is when you wear a rucksack, which is an enormous backpack that is packed to the brim, and you walk very many miles in your full uniform and boots. You also have to have a big supply of water that doesn't count as a weight. The standard weight for a rucksack is 35 pounds. Dry plus water. Water is an additional weight. And the standard for a rucking pace is a 15-minute mile. When I went to air assault school, I had to do a 12-mile ruck with a weighted vest, which is bulletproof, which is called an IBA, with an assault pack, which is similar to a rucksack, which is a type of backpack, plus water in under 3 hours. I was luckily able to complete it, and I'm really happy that I did. But it's those time-sensitive challenges that really show what the Army is about when it comes down to it. Whether you're going to be a nurse, whether you're going to be a psychologist, whether you're going to be an Army vet, or whether you're going to be on the front lines, the Army wants everyone physically ready to perform and ready to do their job. And that means everyone has to be up to standard. They hold everyone to the same standard. And that's something that I think is both unfair and also completely fair. The Army is a meritocracy in my eyes.
Okay. I need to change
This.
to be closer.
Okay.
Because I need to.
Do I have to redo anything?
No.
Okay.
I
That
just
makes
need,
sense.
like,
Oh, you just
for
need
my
more than one
assignment, I
angle.
need 2 different angles.
Gotcha.
I'm going to pause this. How did you find out you were selected for air assault school? So talk about like who told you, or if it was an email, where you were when you received it, and then you can go into like how you initially felt.
When I found out I was selected for air assault school, the only slot of the entire summer, I thought I was in trouble because it was during their mandatory lab, which happens on Wednesdays for 2 hours, and you're supposed to be with all the other cadets, training and doing your thing. So I was on the drill deck of the armory, which is just a big room, and they were like, Polgar, go into Master Sergeant Patron's office. He needs to talk to you. And there was nothing bad about it, but really, they don't take you aside to tell you things unless it's something bad or something dramatic. So I was kind of concerned, and it was also early spring semester. So I had no idea what to think, and I was a freshman. I was a freshman girl, and I didn't really know anything about ROTC, let alone big Army, which is what we call the actual Army in ROTC. So they took me into the office, and they said, Polgar, how do you feel about climbing a rope? And I was like, I can climb a rope. I've been given rope climbs as punishment for being a gymnast for about the last 15 years of my life. I can climb a rope with no legs. And they were like, so how would you feel about going to air assault school? And I was literally like, what's that? And they gave me a short description, and I asked, can I think about it? And they seemed kind of stunned because they obviously presented it as this opportunity that I was lucky to get chosen for. And I had heard of schools before. I'd heard the boys above me in the class of the sophomores brag and try to compete, and not even brag, but discuss the merits of different schools and what they wanted to shoot for, what they wanted to aim for, while understanding that only one or two of them would ever get that chance during this summer or the next summer. And that they might get it in their Army career, but they might never get it, because as a cadet, you have the least amount of responsibilities, and so it's really your time to get specialized training, like Air Assault School or Airborne School, or even SEER School, which stands for Seek, Evade. It's basically a school that's about what would happen if you were captured as a prisoner of war and how you should escape and how you should evade torture. It's very intense, and all these boys were discussing it, and it really didn't seem to apply to me because I was just a freshman who had just contracted with Army ROTC and been given my scholarship, which I felt lucky to have received. So they told me this, and I asked if I could think about it, and they were just like, what else are you doing this summer? Like, what could possibly be more important? And I was like, I want to be a lifeguard with my sister at my camp in Vermont. It's all girls. Gwyneth Paltrow went there. And they were just kind of like, you can be a lifeguard any summer. Like, we have one slot for Air Assault School, and we think you can pass. And I was kind of stunned, but also I did believe I could pass. They talked about how there's a number of obstacles on the first day, and if you fail an obstacle, you drop the course. And these obstacles are not easy, but they're also very specific to the skills you have. If you cannot climb a rope, you cannot pass these obstacles. If you cannot climb a ladder where you're about 40 feet off the ground and the rungs of the ladder are about 5 feet apart from each other, then you cannot pass this obstacle. If you're not comfortable being upside down, like, there are no like what ifs kind of thing. You have to be certain about your skills, and you have to be able to do it under pressure. So I was very scared, and they just kept talking about how they would not have chosen me if they didn't think I was ready, because they could give it to anyone else. And I actually asked them during that meeting, I was like, who else is on your list? Like, why did you choose me? And they said, number one, we think you can do it. And we had 2 slots last year, and someone failed. A senior boy who was the head of our entire battalion failed. And we think you can do it. We think you can pass it. And because he failed, one of those 2 slots failed, we were only given 1 slot for that summer. So if I failed, no one in the entire battalion was going to get their wings, which is what you get when you pass Air Assault School. So it was a lot of pressure, and I was reluctant to say yes immediately, but I was also extremely reluctant to pass it up as an opportunity. And I talked about it with one of my close friends, and he actually gave me all his notes on how to pass Air Assault School, which was so sweet, so nice, and I was so grateful for them. And I didn't even realize that it was because he'd been expecting to be given the slot. And when I realized later, I felt pretty guilty, and I also felt like he was the bigger person for giving me that information to help me pass. And it reminded me that we're a family, and that me not passing wouldn't have taken anything. Like, if I didn't pass, it would be a loss for all of us, because we're a family and I represent the whole battalion. And once I got selected, he got over it, and he decided to help me, because me passing would reflect well on all of us. I don't know if other people felt the same way. No one else really talked to me about it. And none of the older people who had gone to Air Assault School really talked to me about it. One day I ran into someone in the gym while I was working out and they were working out, and they talked to me and they said, "Are you ready?" And I was like, I don't know if I'm ready. I've been rucking with the MS3s, the juniors, because there's a 12-mile ruck in Air Assault School, and I had only rucked up to about 4 miles, so a third of the way I needed to go, and not in full gear, not in full kit. And he said, if you fail, it's because we failed in preparing you. And I thought about that. It seemed very true, but he also didn't offer to prepare me. So it was kind of one of those situations where sink or swim to an extent. Like, here are the tools that you can get to succeed. Like, we arranged to have a time to practice the obstacles at an obstacle course about 2 hours away in Fort Bragg, but we didn't do it soon enough for me to get the permission. So I knew I was going to air assault without having ever practiced the obstacles before. But I could watch YouTube videos of them over and over again, and I could be reassured that it was in my strength to do it, but there were just some things that I couldn't be sure about. So I felt guilty. I felt guilty that they weren't preparing me, but also that I wasn't preparing myself to the extent that I knew I could, and that there were other people who could have done it, and that if I failed, I would be letting everyone down. And I would be letting the girls down because they could have chosen any of the boys. All of the boys that had rucked, there's this thing called the Baton Death March. There's also other competitive rucks that you can do that are marathon long, and they were all very good at them, and they were all very capable, but they couldn't do the obstacles. So I tried to remind myself that I was uniquely qualified and that they wouldn't have chosen me if there was a better option. They weren't choosing me because I, quote unquote, deserved it. They were choosing me because I could do it, because I was capable. And that's what I kept reminding myself, because it was almost too scary to think that I wasn't capable, that they were just shooting their shot and choosing me. Because if they were and I failed, then I come back a failure, and everyone knew I was chosen. They actually started calling me Air Assault, like instead of my name, which was interesting. I was happy when I came back and I had finally passed and they called me Air Assault, because then it's a congratulation. But even I remember I was at a basketball game and I was eating popcorn, and the person next to me, I was just eating popcorn kind of aggressively, and he was like, "Oh, good job. You must be bulking up for air assault." And I was just like, "What?" I understood. It was like all in good fun, and they were treating me like one of the bros, like in training, like for this next big thing. But it came out of left field, all the things that I would have to do and all of the like mental pressure that it would entail, because everyone else put their names down on lists for these schools. Everyone else thought about which ones to apply to, and I was yanked out of lab and told that I was chosen because the slot didn't work for other people who could do the obstacles. Like maybe there were a couple of people who could do it, but they were all going to different trainings that couldn't be moved. And air assault school can't be moved either. It's at a certain time, and that's it. Other people were doing military to military exchanges. They were doing summer training between their junior and their senior year. That's mandatory. And everyone else wasn't qualified. So I was chosen and told I had to do it. And so I did my best to prepare, and I did my best to feel good about the fact that I got this opportunity, because it's not just respected in ROTC. I knew that once I got out of ROTC and graduated, I would be more respected as a girl who passed air assault by the entire Army, because it's not everyone who gets chosen, and once you get chosen, it's not everyone who passes. So I tried to treat it with happiness and treat it with gratitude.
Okay. Yeah, basically you answered all three of my how did you find out and what emotions came with it and how did your peers react, all in that, unless there's something extra you want to add.
I could talk about coming back and talking about my emotions.
Like my last two questions are more like general, like rapid.
Also, I failed a phase in air assault school. Do you want me to talk about that?
Yeah.
Okay. So before I talk about coming back.
Oh, sorry.
You're totally good.
This like thing keeps shifting and I don't know why. Okay. Go for it.
There are 3 phases in air assault school, and I failed phase 2. Phase 1 is mostly focused on the basics of helicopters, of taking a written test about your knowledge, how much they can carry, how much the rope weighs, how much the rope can lift, basic stuff, and then also a layout where you have to pack a certain amount of things in a certain amount of time and in a certain amount of ways. And all pretty basic, but just like time pressure, and then also the obstacles. So once I'd passed that, I was feeling pretty happy, and we started working on sling loading, which is inspecting the equipment that is needed to strap in gear to the helicopter. It's very physical. I always never really understood trade school. Like, why would you go away for 2 years to learn how to be an electrician? Or not even understood, it just not something that I felt like would ever touch my life. And in this way it did. There were other people next to me who were enlisted guys and had been driving in Humvees and fixing them for years. And here I was trying to inspect the same Humvee that I had never seen in my life for how to hook it up to a helicopter. So I felt very out of my element, but I was also getting to know everyone around me. I was almost getting too comfortable. I started laughing and making jokes when I was in line for inspection. I remember I actually was running out of Air Assault School on, I think it was day 5 or 6, with my helmet bobbing. You're given a number. You're not referred to by your name, and your number is written and stenciled on your helmet. And someone called my number, or my name. Maybe they knew my name by that point. And I actually, I got asked for my number while I was at Air Assault School by someone else, another student. So I was getting pretty comfortable, and I thought this next phase is going to be possible. I'm here for long enough. I understand the players and I understand the rules of the game. What I didn't realize is that sling loading is the hardest phase, and the physical tests that they prep you with, the examples they give you in terms of the equipment is a lot easier than the actual test. And so you're given 2 minutes to find 3 out of the 4 deficiencies of the 4 errors in rigging up that gear. So maybe it's missing a knot, maybe it's missing a piece of duct tape, but you have 2 minutes to find 3 out of them and point to them and say, deficiency, just like that. And I thought it would be fine. I thought it would be hard, but I thought it would be fine. And lo and behold, it was not fine. And I waited in line with everyone else, which was about 200 people at that time. I waited in line for about 4 hours. We weren't allowed to talk. We were not allowed to sit the whole time. And I just thought about my sequences, how to go through each gear, each different station, and how to find out the deficiencies and how to pass this test. And I got there, and the very first one I failed, and I moved on. And the very next one I failed, and I moved on, and I passed the second 2. And I knew, because this was hard, that even if I retested, that I might not be able to pass. And a lot of people retest. It's not the craziest thing ever because the afternoon is made for that. But if you fail the retest, which is the same 2 minutes, and they redo all of the gear so it's not the same deficiencies, then you get dropped. If you fail the retest and you miss the deficiencies again, which all get redone, then you get dropped, and that's permanent. And so I went into the retest extremely nervous, and I knew I would have to pass 2 of the ones that I missed, which was the water trailer and the box. I still remember. I can literally picture the things that I missed. And I don't know what it was. I talked to people afterwards, but I failed the second time. And I went into the car, which people were waiting, happy, smiling because they passed the retest, and I cried. And they asked me, "Did you pass?" I was I'm literally crying. How do you not understand? And they drove me back to the hotel, and I was extremely emotional, and I felt like an absolute failure because I was there to do one thing, and I didn't do that one thing. And they all reassured me, and they said, "You're a freshman." I was the only freshman there. They said, "You have so much more to give. You did so well. So many people failed out. You were unlucky." All of these things. And they were all true to some extent, but they weren't enough because I had literally failed. There was no doubt about it, and the Army wasn't going to put a Band-Aid on that. And then I realized that I had passed phase 1 and that I could do something which is called recycling, which is when you apply to start at the very beginning of the phase that you failed, so start phase 2 again and try to complete phase 2 and phase 3. Now, I have no idea why I got chosen to recycle, because I stayed there and I called the people in charge of me at UNC, and one of them was on vacation in the Bahamas and did not want to be contacted. And I called the second, and he reassured me that even some of his brightest and best guys failed the sling loading because they got unlucky. Because in those 2 minutes, they didn't find what was wrong. They didn't find the knot. Their hand just didn't touch it. Because. And he reassured me that I shouldn't feel like a failure if I came back to Chapel Hill without those wings. And I was ready to go home, and I was kind of resigned to my fate, and I was chosen to recycle. So once given that second chance, I was ecstatic and also so nervous because the Army was paying for me to stay an extra 20 days and try and pass. Everyone else who had passed phase 2 moved on, and they moved on to phase 3, and I was actually introduced to a whole new class. And I was the super senior. I was the one held back, and it kind of sucked because they all wanted help with me. They all wanted my help for phase 1, which is very easy, and so they shouldn't need my help, but we helped them anyways, and I felt kind of useless. I waited around, I worked out, I cried, I laid in my hotel, I listened to sad music, got really into Jessie Reyez. She's Canadian. You should all look her up. I don't know what I did, but I just tried to like focus on phase 2. I watched YouTube videos of how to inspect sling loads. I wrote down the sequences over and over again. Honestly, quite depressing looking back on it. But I knew I had that one goal and I wasn't going to let it stop me the second time. Because there I was in Kentucky, in Fort Campbell, at Airborne School, and I was going to pass. And I was going to maybe make some friends doing it, but that wasn't the goal anymore, like it kind of was the first time. And lo and behold, I did the ruck again. I did the 6 mile again. I did the written test again. I passed. And then I did the sling loads. And I failed the first time. I failed the water trailer again. I was so pissed. But I went back for the retest. And I remember my heart beating. And I remember you sit there and you're not allowed to open your eyes while everyone else is being tested. But I heard him say, deficiency, all really close together at the end. And so I knew it was at the end of the inspection, and so I tried to use that to my advantage. And I inspected everything. I didn't rush to the very end, and it was getting around like the minute 30 mark, and I had 30 more seconds, and I think I had only found one error, and I needed to find 2 more errors. And my heart was beating, and I remember shaking this one thing, and it just felt off. Like it just felt a little bit loose. And I didn't know what was wrong, but I pointed to it anyways, and I said deficiency. And I hope they wouldn't ask me to explain, because if they asked me to explain, I would not have gotten the points. But they didn't, and they were like, you got lucky this time, aerosol, or Sierra, because once you recycle, you actually get an S in front of your name so that they know that you're a recycle, that you're a new one, and they say to everyone else, don't ask the recycles for help, they failed for a reason. So in a way, you're kind of ostracized from the other people, and maybe you hang out with other Sierras, with other failers, other recycles. So that's what I did. I passed, and it felt like a weight lifted off my shoulders. Literally, I hadn't realized like the physical stress that it had been putting me under, but I went back, I smiled, I laughed, I high-fived everyone else, and I kind of felt the same as them because we passed the same amount of Airborne School. And we could go to bed that night at 7 p.m. and wake up at 4 a.m. and do it all over again because that's all you have to do. And so I passed phase 3, which is finally the fun phase. It's where you do a 4-mile run, where you do a 12-mile ruck, and you also get to rappel and jump out of helicopters. So you start with a wall. You don't jump right to the helicopters, but I finally passed, and it felt amazing. Even though I wasn't doing it with my original classmates, and even though I didn't want to tell people that I recycled, didn't sound so great to me personally, because here I was, the one person selected, and I couldn't really do it. But in the end, like, a diploma's a diploma, and my wings are on my uniform, and no one can take those off. So.
That's a really good story.
Thanks.
So cute.
Thanks.
Must protect at all costs. Okay. So just like wrapping it up. What advice do you have for anyone thinking of joining Army ROTC?
For anyone who's thinking about joining Army ROTC, I have some words of advice. First of all, you have to be able to wake up. If you can't wake up with maybe 2 or 3 alarms, preferably 1, then you shouldn't be in Army ROTC because it's going to be a struggle. And the basic things shouldn't be a struggle because there's going to be other challenges. And you need to be able to do the basic things and not feel like it's a burden on your life because it will become too overwhelming. But maybe waking up is decently easy for you and it's a sacrifice you're willing to make and your body adjusts. Awesome. Now you need to be able to run because for some reason, running is how the Army qualifies fitness. Maybe you can bike a marathon. If you can't run it, then the Army doesn't really care. So that would be my second piece of advice. I actually started running and doing push-ups and sit-ups to the Army standard the summer before my freshman year because all that information is online, and I was like, okay, how fast do I need to be able to run 2 miles? How many push-ups do I need to do? How many sit-ups do I need to do? And when I took my first PT test as a freshman, who wasn't contracted, who didn't have a scholarship, I got a perfect score. I wasn't surprised that I got a perfect score because I had performed just like I'd been performing all summer on my own, but I was actually surprised that I was like unique in doing it because none of the other freshmen had prepared. And I guess that's my second piece of advice. And my biggest piece of advice is that other people don't know more than you. They're coming in with just as little expertise. You're all 18 years old, joining Army ROTC. What do you know about the Army? And what do you know about yourself? It's probably not that much. And so when the boys start talking about guns and other people start talking about how they run and their form, just realize that they're not experts. Maybe they're subject area experts in one thing, but you are in something else. And none of the boys can ever tell me how my hair is out of regulation because I know and they don't. And I can't ever tell them about a tank because they know and I don't. But there are also some things that overlap a lot, and we can learn how to read a map in the military way, read a military map together, because no one has taught any of us that before. So I guess being a good learner is also really important. So I guess to sum it up, wake up early, run, learn, and take direction, because at the end of the day, if you can say yes sir and yes ma'am and mean it, and listen to what people say to you even when you don't agree, then you can go far, because you have to understand that you're not always in charge of yourself, because when you join an organization like the Army, it does require discipline, and it requires you to say, yes, I can do that, ma'am or sir, because that's something that I struggled with. Politeness. I'm from the North. We don't say ma'am or sir, but I do now, and it really does carry a weight. It really means something, because these people are your superiors, and you can't argue that. You can't be like, well, he's my superior, but like we all are in the same place. Like we're all at UNC. Like we all are here now. Like no, that person is in charge of you, and they know more than you, and they're your teacher, and you will listen to them, and you'll learn. And one day there will be people who are underneath you, because if the Army doesn't operate, then people are in danger. And so when it comes down to it, maybe you don't agree with what your leader is telling you, but you are subordinate to them, and they're in charge. So you listen. So not only am I a girl in Army ROTC, I'm also Jewish, and that's like a decent part of my identity that I didn't realize was so different until I came here. I would say that the Army is really diverse. In fact, I've looked up some statistics, and the Army is more diverse than the United States population. There's more people of color who enlist and who choose other options, like the military, I think, than people of the majority ethnicity or whatever you would call it. But there's still not very many women. I didn't think that religion would play a big part in the Army, and that's one of the things I loved about it, that it was just kind of this true neutral, that anyone could succeed no matter where they were from, just based on completing the tasks that were set for you. And I still think that's true. I still think that's true. But I think that sometimes personal connection, like let's say my dad is a full bird colonel who works in cadet commands, or who can refer me to a mentor in military intelligence. Some of those things still matter, and so you can find things out not because you're better, not because you're faster, not because you're smarter, but because you have connections and you network. And I don't love that. And also that religion does sometimes permeate the Army space. I know there's a separation between church and state, but on our dollar bill it says "In God We Trust." So there is some overlap there. And at graduation at Rotc School, which was one of the happiest, I don't know how about happiest, but one of the most satisfying days of my life, you finish the 12-mile ruck at about 7 a.m., and then you practice for graduation. So they told us that someone was going to come up and say a prayer, and we were all going to bow our heads. And we were all going to say, Amen. And I was fine doing it. But I didn't want everyone to have to do it. But they said, if you don't want to say amen, just say Amen, and that's fine. They just wanted us to look uniform, and I understand that. I understand that because that's what the Army's about. It's about being one big unit, kind of like I said, one big family, and presenting that united front to the outside world. I'm not sad that I don't share that I don't share my religion with the majority of people. And I'm not even sad they included a prayer in that service, because I think it was very important. It was just surprising to me that even while I wanted things to be equal and I wanted things to be fair, there's still a way that the majority can affect a minority, and sometimes you just have to bow your head and say amen, even if you don't mean it. And I don't resent the Army for that. I just think it's interesting in how our society works. And I'm proud to be a Jewish woman serving, because not that many women serve, and not that many Jews serve proportionally. And this country has done a lot for all of us, women included, Jews included, everyone, right? All religions, everyone in this country who benefits from safety and security. So if that means having an unusual person serve and changing what the Army looks like, because I think when we all imagine a soldier, we imagine a white man, we imagine him relatively young, and we probably imagine him Christian. I don't think you think about his religion. I don't think that ties into it. But I think if we picture him sacrificing his life, he might think about God. And so I'm glad that I get to change that perspective for people, because the soldiers are not just one thing. And I think sometimes people are afraid of if they're not that person, if they're not that white male, then they're like, oh my gosh, like he fulfills all the stereotypes. Like he's a private that'll marry her in 2 weeks after meeting her. And they dumb down the Army and they don't quite understand what it means. And so I'm happy to break that stereotype, and I'm also happy that I get to be the person, be the woman, or be the Jewish person who sacrifices because of all the things that this country has done for all of those people. Yeah. Yay. I feel like that was necessary, or like it added.
Yeah, and now, because I forgot that I said I would do B-roll at Hillel, and now I'm like, I can't do B-roll at Hillel if she doesn't talk about like
that's
her
so
religion.
good, yeah.
So now, yeah, perfect.
Identity.
Yeah.
Cool.
Okay, say your full name.
My name is Sophie Polgar, Sophie Polgar. I'm 20 years old, and you can just call me Sophie.